Just a gentle note before we begin. Today's conversation includes discussions of grief, sudden loss, and caregiving responsibility. Please listen in a way that feels supportive for you. You're welcome to pause and come back at any time. There's a kind of caregiving that begins quietly and a kind that begins in a single moment. A phone call, a funeral, a door that closes on the life you knew. And suddenly, you're not only grieving, you're organising, you're advocating, managing systems and making decisions you were never trained for. Today's guest understands that experience intimately. Agazit Negash is the author of Joyful Resilience. And after losing both parents within weeks of each other, Agazit was thrust into the role of primary caregiver and legal guardian for their autistic brother, Biruk, balancing mourning with advocacy, exhaustion with love, and responsibility with compassion. This episode is for the caregiver who never planned this role, but is showing up anyway and needs to hear you are not alone and you're not doing it wrong. Agazit, welcome to Radiant Moments.
Hi, thank you for having me, Michelle.
I'd like to start our conversation today with the moment your life changed, and we'll take this really gently. You lost both parents within weeks of each other. What do you remember most about that time? Not the details, but the feeling and the sense of it.
When I lost my parents 25 days apart, I just felt like it was completely surreal. It happened so suddenly, and I felt like I was at a loss. I didn't have any sense of direction, didn't know what tomorrow held. I was actually looking for a reason to keep going. I was looking for something to keep me kind of a way to medicate the grief in my environment and my surroundings, because I just didn't know how to deal with the overwhelming amount of pain that I was feeling. And in that moment, I looked over to my little brother, who is Biruk, who has autism, and there was this sense of purpose where I couldn't let this grief just go to waste. It had to fuel my ability to take care of somebody who needed me in that moment, which was him. After we had lost our parents, I took on the role of being his legal guardian, but that was really a part of my way, not necessarily to hide my grief, but to channel my grief into something where it could be used in a very powerful way, and a way to really support another individual, and also in a way for my grief to not go to waste.
I think that's such a beautiful way of not only supporting yourself in that process of sudden loss, but also to support your brother in that space who probably wasn't able to process the information like you were because of how sudden and unexpected. You can't really plan for or educate or help them to be able to process information if it's never been experienced before. And people say, I had to grow up overnight. What did that mean in your life? What decisions or responsibilities arrived before you even had time to start grieving?
There was so many things I had to figure out overnight. When I had him, and the book starts out this way, I picked him up from the airport. He was sitting next to me in the airplane. And all I thought was, I have to figure out a way to take care of my brother. I have to support him. I didn't know what that looked like, but I thought to myself, okay, who is he going to stay with? Where is he going to stay? Am I going to take care of him? Does me being his legal guardian mean that he has to stay with me physically, or does it mean that he stays in an adult home? Is he going to have the care that he needs? I haven't been with him in over several years. We hadn't lived together. So to take on this responsibility meant figuring out his medication, figuring out if he needed a neuropsychological evaluation, figuring out where he was going to live, figuring out what his support system would look like. And was I going to be within proximity of that support system, given that we lived in two different states? It also was about figuring out his meals and the kind of food that was good for him and that worked for him and his diet. There were so many things I had to figure out. Every state has a different way of handling and supporting individuals who are special needs or who are on the spectrum. Every state's services are different and they vary, and sometimes they're fractured, so they're not communicating with each other. And so I had to do a lot of homework. So it was just emails, calls, asking questions, and then figuring out there was more questions that I didn't ask, and then figuring out his medical needs, his physical needs, his mental needs, his emotional needs, the whole gamut. So that growing up overnight was just asking questions as I was observing him and as I was around him and surrounding myself with his process of grief as well. And so it was knowing what my parents had left behind, what their established system was, and being open to the fact that I might have to change that for him so he could have a different life after them as well.
I hear in those early days, there were lots of hard parts in discovering this new role, how you guys integrated as a family, particularly because he was being supported by both of your parents and possibly he was living with them as well. In those early days, what was the hardest part to explain to other people? The part that they couldn't see?
One of the interesting things about my brother's upbringing and after my parents passed away was my parents were first generation immigrants to the United States. And so, being in a first generation immigrant household, there were different cultural things that he had been acclimated to and a lifestyle that he's acclimated to where he was very protected from his surrounding. His social norm was very different from what his norm would look like now. And a lot of things I couldn't explain was being old enough and being daring enough to put him into an adult home and it being kind of seen as, no, you could never do that. You could never put him in a home. But it was actually one of the best things for him to grow up and to really adapt and to take ownership of his life as well, because he is an adult, but he was never given the opportunity. And I think there was this perspective of maybe even pity, I would say, or just fear and trepidation from the decisions that I was making. But these were bold decisions that I felt like were the best. And sometimes you're not going to know unless you try. And this was really a good way for us to try to see how he would adapt and settle in. And it was really a wonderful decision. Initially, I think a lot of people just didn't understand some of the bold moves I was making to put him in an adult home, take him off certain medications that were not really benefiting him, to not keep him as sheltered, but allowing him to explore the world and adapt in a way that was the most beneficial for him on the spectrum.
I guess when you're talking about having that combination of grief and responsibility, but also your cultural background, the stigma behind what was acceptable, what you needed to achieve in those times, and going against the norm in order to provide a better outcome for him because you were able to see from an outside perspective that that was no longer serving him in that moment. And that takes great courage and bravery when you're going against what is seen as acceptable, it's seen as your responsibility as the older sister. It's such a lot on one's nervous system to also trying to manage this very complex situation that you haven't really been involved with day in and day out. And then to also be trying to manage expectations, pushback I'm gathering from the decisions that you decided were going to propel his life forward in a different way. And one of the most isolating things in caregiving is that you can be breaking like inside while still functioning on the outside.
Yes.
How did grief show up for you while you still had to keep life running? Paperwork, advocacy, routines, appointments, daily care. What was it and how did it show up?
I don't know how this happened, but I kind of decided to compartmentalize it and I waited until I finally found a home for him. Part of my lifestyle, I'm also an artist. I paint and I draw, and I knew that that would be a form of healing and therapy for me. One of the chapters I call it Art Escape. And so I had at the time when I finally found an adult home for him. Actually, he picked his adult home, and that was awesome for him to say, "This is my home. I'm going to live here." Once we got him into an adult home and once he was settled in, it was my time to reflect. It was my time to preserve my parents' memory. And I did that by doing portraits of them. And it helped me capture their eyes, their smile, and just going back into my memories and just thinking about the years that I had spent with them. And I chose to celebrate their life. But one of the things that helped me capture my memories of them and to hold on to them, even though they were no longer here, was one, was taking care of my brother, of course. But secondly, painting their eyes and looking into those eyes that gave me words of wisdom, gave me insight to the wisdom that I didn't have. Memorizing my parents' mouths and just all the smiles and laughter and joy and conversations and jokes we would share. Memorizing my parents' hair. And I did portraits of them when they were younger, when they were older. And it was just a way of just honoring them. And that really helped me process my grief. And I don't think you ever stop grieving the loss of your parents. And I think over the years, maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, I would think back. It's been several years now since they passed, but every now and then I'll think of their birthday or I'll think of them. And of course, I honor them, but of course, I grieve them because I miss them so much. But I chose to just honor them and to preserve their memory during that time. And I didn't feel like I had such a tremendous loss with my father because We knew he was going to be passing because he had dementia, but I had such a great relationship with him. And during his lifetime, I really made every opportunity to spend time with him, to love him, so I maximized my time, and I was very intentional with my time with him. But for my mother, I wasn't expecting her to pass away so suddenly. And so we have times in our lives where we know somebody's going to pass because they're older or their health is deteriorating. But then we have times where we lose people so suddenly. And my mother was that case. I was not expecting her to pass away so suddenly. I mentioned in the book, I believe she probably passed away from a broken heart because she really loved my father. And so when she passed away, I was trying to write my own ending, very much. This is not the ending that I wanted. I didn't want her to leave so soon. I didn't want her to go away. And when I thought about how she left and just had to be at peace with how it happened, it was really hard. There's still a part of me that is always trying to figure out how I can incorporate her memory, just the same with my father, into my life. But I think the hardest thing was not having the ending that I thought I was going to have with my mother. And I think that's the story for a lot of us. Sometimes we don't get the ending that we intended to have with a loved one. And when that happens, how do we make peace with that? And how do we navigate that? It's something that I still am navigating to this day. And I think about her every now and then. I'll see something about her and I hold on to that. But I have, in my own way, have slowly released the fact that I didn't get the ending that I wanted. And that's okay. But I'm still processing the fact that she's not here in the way that I'd hoped for her to be, in the way that I thought she would be with me. I had this plan in my mind that she was going to be with me. She's going to be a grandmother. She'll be there when I have kids, and then she's going to outlive my father. And that wasn't the case. And that wasn't the path that she took. And it's something that I think we often don't talk about sometimes in grief, where we just get stuck in that point. But I think about what she would have wanted for me. And I don't think she would have wanted me to be stuck. I think she would have wanted me to be strong for my brother. I think she would have wanted me to be well on my way to continuing my life and having my own family, and honoring her in ways that I knew that she would be proud of. And so that's kind of how I made my peace with losing her unexpectedly.
In the moment when you were talking about the broken heart, because that is a reality also for caregivers, especially when your whole world revolves around them. You hear times where parents actually pass on when they're perfectly healthy because they have been caregiving for so long. They have such a connection. And I so resonate with the book about the broken heart and passing away. And it is definitely something that is challenging to process when you have this vision of your life that you were expecting to have with this person and the journeys and the memories you thought you were going to make. And many caregivers carry quiet grief. They're not only grieving a person, but they're grieving the life that they had, the future that they imagined, the vision of themselves that felt freer. When we're talking right now, I feel like that resonated for you. What helped you keep going in that season? Not in a motivational way, but in a real life way. What did you do to help you to grieve that part of your journey?
That's one of the first things I mentioned in the chapter was I thought at this age I would be married, I'd have my kids, and I'd have X, Y, and Z planned out. Instead, I'm grieving the loss of my parents, and now I have a responsibility of my brother. It was a complete curveball. And I kind of, in that moment, I let go of my plans. I let go of whatever I thought was going to happen. I grieved that. I lost it. I just let it go because I knew that there was a new frontier and a new path that was literally being created for me, and it was overnight. And I focused so much on taking care of my brother and finding the resources for him and managing my career. I let the path kind of forge itself, if you will. And I let go of this idea of letting things be in a certain way because it wasn't going to happen in the way that I wanted. But I still believe that my dreams would come back and the things I wanted to do would line up, and I'd have the family that I wanted someday. But it might not look like the way that I wanted. If anything, I had to adapt and bring my brother up to be a part of that journey. I had to adapt and allow him to be a part of that path with me into my future. And that was a beautiful story in itself, to have him right by my side and me supporting him, and in his own way, him supporting me, and adding the flavor and the richness to my life that I didn't anticipate and didn't expect. Because Biruk is actually, he's quite funny. He's very humorous. And I wasn't expecting him to have so much humor in the midst of all this grief as well. That humor, that unexpected joy that he provided during this whole process was not something that I anticipated. And it was very unpredictable, but I was very humbled, and I felt very blessed in moments of my grief to have him be a part of that, because I wasn't expecting that. And it was almost like God's way or the universe's way of saying, I still got you. It's going to be okay. Your path is going to look different, but everything is going to work out. You'll have a peace about the direction that things are gonna turn out in a positive way for you. I really do believe in good karma. I believe if you're doing a good thing for good people, it's gonna come back to your life. And it has been nothing but that since then. I took on this role. I took it on to take care of my brother, and I give him the life that I felt like he deserved after my parents passed away. And I felt like he deserved to have a full life, a happy life, despite the loss that we had endured. And I did everything in my power to give that to him, and I still do to this day. And I feel like I keep being rewarded in my life in so many other ways because I'm providing a life for somebody else in some way. My whole life is being even further enriched in different ways.
I think if a listener is in that thick of grief and caregiving right now, what would you want them to know about being human in that space?
Be human in that space, be authentic to yourself. There were many nights that I was in my bed crying. There were many nights where I felt like things were hopeless. I didn't know what was going to happen. I mentioned in the book, I felt like I was waltzing on 2 bars of soap, solo waltzing on 2 bars of soap in a ballroom, and I had no idea what was going to happen. I had no idea if I was going to fall. I had no idea if I was going to make it to the other end of the ballroom. I felt out of sync and out of touch with everything because there was so much going on. And I just felt like there was not a lot of support that I was hoping for at times. I had family members that, though they intended well, they just didn't have the capacity to take care of my brother or support me in the way that I needed. And that was a grief. I was grieving that in itself too. And that's the harsh reality sometimes of caregiving, and it's the harsh of not having people that you can depend on when you thought you could. And that was hard. It was very hard. I mean, there were moments where I would go grab a glass of wine and just decompress a little bit and just process what was going on with my life and not having the support that I thought that I was going to have, and all that fear and anxiety and trepidation. And but then having people that were around me that have gone through what I've been through was very, very important. And what I mean by that is finding a network and a community of people who have a loved one that is maybe similar in your situation, where they might be on the spectrum, or maybe they've lost somebody, or they don't have the ability to take care of an individual. Finding those kinds of people is very important when you're going through something like this, because you would like to believe, I wanted to believe, that I could rely on other people that didn't endure this, but they didn't understand sometimes. And we just didn't click, and that happens. But finding the right kind of people that I could call at 2 a.m. and be like, I'm falling apart. I really need some encouragement right now. And having them just walk with me was enough just to get me from point A to point B. And that was a really incredible safety net for me that I desperately needed. And it really helped me navigate through a lot of those dark times and painful times where I was exhausted. I didn't have any gas in my tank. I didn't know what tomorrow held. I didn't know how difficult things were going to be. And I just wanted to go in the corner of my room and just start crying. And I didn't want my brother to see that. I don't want him to see me grieving, because I didn't know what was happening and I didn't know what to do. And I felt so alone, but I knew somebody to call. I knew who to go to. And that to me was a safety net that I needed. Your community and the type of community you surround yourself with as a caregiver is incredibly profound and incredibly vital, especially when you're going through grief.
Yes, it's very hard to navigate that isolation when the people that you have on your speed dial normally are unable to meet you where you
Yeah.
are afraid to meet you where you are, don't know how to meet you where you are. And it's really beautiful when you are able to connect with a community that gets it, that can just hear you say, I'm having a hard day. Can you just,
Yeah.
can you be here for a second so that I can put my feet in front of me for the next day? And I think that's such a beautiful moment of when you can ring somebody and say, I can't do today. Today has been rough, and to feel safe enough to and vulnerable enough to cry, to say the things that are hard to hear when you're really struggling, because it is difficult. It's not like a walk in the park where you just can pick up a grocery bag and keep going. It's multi-layered. There's hundreds of demands that we don't recognize when we're caregiving, when we
Mhm.
have all of the filing systems open and we're running through all of the things that we've got to do. And there
Yeah.
are hundreds of things that we do subconsciously because it becomes second nature. And that's the part that's disconnected, because
Mhm.
they can't understand the constant on process. And I want to spend time here because caregivers of autistic loved ones are often navigating systems, misunderstandings, and judgment, and the deep emotional work of staying present. Can you tell us about your brother? What do you want listeners to understand about Biruk, about who he is beyond that label, beyond his diagnosis?
Oh, yes. He is incredibly emotionally intuitive and very, very observant. And he's very smart. He is someone who processes emotions just the same way as all of us do. He experiences the same feelings that we all do: happiness, sadness, grief, the same feelings. And in the book, I mentioned this. There was a moment where he expressed his grief in a way that I hadn't anticipated. He was very upset. And we were out in the park and he just kind of had an angry episode. And I didn't understand where it came from because it came out of nowhere. And then when I pulled him aside and I talked to him, and we came home, and I was like, "Are you okay, bud? What was that about?" And he said, "I'm sorry. I don't know why I behaved that way. I don't know what happened." And there was a recognition in him where he felt like he disassociated from himself because he was grieving and he was angry about his life changing. He was angry that he lost his parents. He was angry that his life was never going to be the same. He didn't know where he was going to be, where he would live. He was very aware in this process that he wasn't sure if he was going to stay with me or if he was going to be living in an adult home. And he was trying to navigate that. And he was trying to be excited about what the future held. He was very optimistic about his future, but he didn't know what it held either. But it was kind of endearing to see him excited about what tomorrow held, despite what he had went through. And I remember when he came home and we talked about it, and he took a nap, and the next day, like, my whole house was spotless and the trash was taken out. And I was like, "What did you do?" He goes, "I'm sorry, I just wanted to, like, help you out." He felt bad about how he felt, how he responded, how he reacted. So he cleaned the whole entire place. And it was his way of making amends with me. And he didn't have to do that, but there was this level of, I want to take care of my sister too. And it was so sweet and it was so beautiful. I was like, my dishes are done. I didn't know that he my trash is taken out. I didn't expect this. And so it was just his way of, like, supporting me and just being, a team player as well. And he's very observant. He has a way of recognizing people and their lifestyles. We would go out, and sometimes he would ask people, "You're smoking. You're smoking a cigarette." And somebody would be like, "Yeah, I am." He'd be like, "You're going to die, right?" And he shouldn't say that to somebody, but he's saying this because he's like, "You might get cancer." He's worried about them, but he's observant and he's wondering about health, and he's trying to eat healthy and he's trying to take care of his body, and he's wondering about other people and their issues and how they live their lives. And so very observant and very, very intuitive and very smart. I know that quite often family members or relatives that have autism, and elopement can happen for a variety of reasons. For him, he wanted independence. And so the book cover is a Coke can, Coke no ice, because one of his first expression or desires he's ever had as a young kid, and he still does today, was Coke, and I want it with no ice. And that is a big deal for him. And to this day, he still wants Coke with no ice. And if he can figure out a way to convince me that I need to take a nap so he can go out and grab some Coke from the local grocery store, he will do that. But that's dangerous for him as well, because people can't understand what he's saying. He might, if he doesn't have any money, how is he getting that soda? So he's very smart. He will figure out a way to get what he wants, however way he needs to get it. And he will make you sometimes think that it's your idea. So it's like, wait a minute, this isn't my idea. This is your idea, but you're making me think it's my idea and it's not my idea. He's trying to convince you that you're the one that made that decision. So incredibly smart for what he's looking for and what he wants. He knows how to run game, if you will. Biruk is incredibly humorous, very smart, very charming, and he knows he's charming. He knows he can work a room and work people. Even when he first moved in with me, the whole entire neighborhood knows him now. Everybody, the grocery stores around us, the UPS people, the local clothing stores, everybody knows Biruk because he's just very impressionable, and he leaves an impact on you because he's so innocent and he's so talkative and he's curious to learn about people, and he asks questions from a place of innocence, and I think it's beautiful. But Biruk is remarkable in his own way. He's got this incredible way of just being a light in your life when you weren't even anticipating or expecting it. And he was a blessing to me, even in my own grief. I wasn't expecting so much joy because he was right by my side.
It's so beautiful when we stop and acknowledge who they are and what they bring outside of their diagnoses or the things that they struggle with, because those things become ingrained in our everyday. And when we're talking to medical professionals, we're not there to celebrate the things that they're really fantastic at. It's like a footnote rather than the dedication that it needs, because we're there to have a problem solved most of the time.
Yeah.
And what are some of the common misunderstandings that you've encountered from extended family or professionals or the wider community? And how did you protect your brother and yourself in those moments?
With family members, I think misunderstanding I had to navigate was them not understanding that he had hopes and dreams and things that he wanted in his life. I think there was this like, oh, he's got dreams, like, but he can never do these things. And so it's one of those things where they entertained the idea, but they didn't believe that he could actually have these things for himself. He wants a job. He wants to have his own independence, drive. He wants to do all these things that make him feel like an independent adult, and a contributing member of society. And that is one of the things that I think that they didn't understand was he wasn't going to be at home on the couch all day. He was going to go out and get a job. And today he's still looking for a job, and he's had several stints where he works the job coach. He's also volunteering. He volunteered at what we have is Habitat for Humanities, and now he's volunteering at the animal shelter. And so he has a life where he wants to contribute and wants to do things day to day. I think there was just this misconception that he would just be at home, that he would not have a life where he wasn't always being monitored, but he can. He can do a lot of things on his own. He can make fries from scratch. He loves making fries from scratch. He loves to pick out avocados, and my dad taught him how to pick avocados, fresh avocados, and he would school me, and he would tell me those are not good. To take those back. So he knows more about fruit and vegetables and produce than I do. So just these things, these contributions to society as a whole, I think that was a misconception. People have been taken back. When he got his first paycheck, very surprised that he was able to get a job and do that. He was doing it, and he can. And so his ability to understand how systems work, how the government works, and how the world works, all these different aspects of the way that we live our lives from the day to day, where money comes from. These are very complex things for somebody who, for him, initially, we didn't think that he could possibly do that. But over time, through exposure, he understands these concepts. He understands how things work. And it's very surprising because it comes from him just observing and reading and learning. I think the misconception from the community, I would say, is the flip side, where community and sometimes even working with his job coaches. He has several job coaches, and even just one of the things that we've learned is to communicate to the community and to other institutions that would work with our family, that he comes from a first-generation immigrant family, that he was very protected for a while, but that doesn't necessarily mean he cannot branch out and he can't learn from what these other organizations can provide for him. The other aspect of this is cross-cultural communication. That's a big thing. Coming from a different culture and learning from our culture and what we perceive as valuable and non-valuable and how he was raised, these dynamics. I say in the book that my parents were Eritrean American, and me, I was American Eritrean because of how I was raised, my perception, my view of life. He was very much the same as well, where he's been exposed to both sides of his culture, and he had to learn it's part of who he is. And so explaining this to organizations that work with our family and building that bridge and really having those conversations, those vulnerable conversations of, hey, this is how he was raised, and these are the things he understands, but that doesn't mean he's not open to learning things in a different way and willing to change. You have to sometimes be open to change. The things that used to work in one part of the world or in maybe in the past are not going to work here, and that's okay to have those conversations. And it's just the acceptance process and the understanding process and building those bridges is very vital, I think, to when you're working with communities, because the fact of the reality is that we're a melting pot and people have different experiences and we're raised different ways, and all of these things contribute to somebody's perception of the world and their environment, and these are conversations that need to be had, and it's very helpful to have those conversations no matter how uncomfortable they may be, because if they're not, you might just close a door that should really be opened, and you might just ignore something or push it away when that could be the one pivotal thing that will actually allow for relationships with the community and with other organizations to actually grow and flourish. And that pioneers don't have teachers, and sometimes you're the one that's building that road. Those uncomfortable development oriented conversations with the community have to happen, and you never know who is going to help.
And it's such a steady reminder that dignity isn't a concept, it's a daily practice that's required. And that's really where these conversations and these misunderstandings need to start, is with the person's dignity and your dignity and their lived experience to date. But that they are capable of making changes, they are capable of learning new things. And particularly if you can adjust it and assign it to something that they're significantly interested in, they can adapt in those situations with great ease, really, when you take notice and you're willing to stop and listen. And they are hard conversations when you come up against societal expectations, where people should be, how it should be seen, acted, responded to. And I think you're right, being a pioneer in that space when you're trying to educate in a respectful way to also see their dignity in the path that we've had, because we all get taught differently. And when you're integrating culture into a new experience, most people aren't aware of the specifics of culture and where we come from and how we have to be respectful in that space too, and kind of come together so that it's a collaboration rather than two
Uh-huh.
fighting areas. I'm really moved by your theme that resilience isn't discovered only in crisis. It's often something we inherit in ourselves. And in Joyful Resilience, you talk about strength being quietly instilled over generations. What values from your parents or your family history did you find yourself reaching for in those hard moments?
I feel like my parents, what they had endured, because they were fleeing from a war zone when they came to the United States, a civil war. What I learned was nothing is new under the sun, and it's possible. It's absolutely possible. I was like, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. And what I mean by that is I talk about their upbringing and what they had experienced in their childhood as well. My mother could have been a child bride, and women and children are the most vulnerable in a war zone. And she fled, and she discovered her own sense of independence and was very afraid, had no idea what tomorrow would hold. But she made that choice to run away and live with a family member and have the education that she felt like she deserved, the ability to think for herself, to pick her husband and not have a husband picked for her. These are things that are still practiced in other parts of the world. That's the reality we live in. And he made a very bold decision to do that, not knowing what tomorrow would hold. And then my father, he grew up in a very big family where his father passed away from malaria, which is curable, but because of a class system, he didn't get the medication that he needed in a timely manner. So he lost his father at a young age. And my father had that really propelled him to want to go into the medical field. And he came from a very poor family, and he had people in his community that supported him and gave him scholarships to go to school and to fulfill his dreams. But he made the most of it. He became a nurse, and he met my mother while he was in school. And then on top of that, they had to flee from the war, and they had me in Khartoum, and they named me Agazit. Agazit means freedom because they came to the United States weeks after I was born. So I was their freedom baby, if you will. So they had already endured so many things, so many obstacles, from establishing a sense of self for themselves at a young age, to fleeing from war, to starting all over again as first generation immigrants in the United States, and then having a child who had autism and having to navigate that with not a lot of resources at the time. This was like the late 80s. And so for me, when I think about everything that they had endured, in some ways, life and death, it made me feel like I don't really have a lot of room to complain. They've given me so much, and I was so humble and so thankful for everything they provided me. I didn't want all of that sacrifice to go to waste. And so this like silent ability to recognize where you come from and recognize sacrifices that people have made for you, and recognizing that I would not be here today if it wasn't for their ability to persevere and be resilient in their own lives. And I wouldn't have what I have right now. I would say unusual way. I'm actually honored, and I'm very thankful that I have the opportunity to take care of my brother. I get to take care of my brother. That's how I see it. I don't really see it as a hard task. It's my greatest honor, especially after everything that they had endured. And it meant the world to me to be able to do that.
You're talking about the journey that created these pathways of resilience, these pathways of love, these pathways of recognizing that at times these hard choices also have these silver linings that make every moment worth it. And if it has a complicated family history, not all positive, they've had experiences, how can they still locate something supportive inside themselves?
That's a great question. You would look at yourself in the mirror and you would say that you're the reason. I think that loving yourself, as hard as it might be sometimes, especially when you don't come from the greatest background, is super important. Loving yourself and knowing that you were worthy of that love, you made it this far. If you made it this far and you were put in a situation where you have to take care of somebody that has a special need or who has autism, I would say that when you look at yourself in the mirror, that sense of love and that self, not in a figure phony way, it is you are fighting thoughts and mindsets that are probably making you feel so much smaller because of maybe the environment that you were brought up in, or maybe didn't have the opportunities that other people have had. But making a deliberate choice to go against what you feel. Your feelings don't authenticate the truth, but they do authenticate a perception of truth. And that perception has got to shift. And that starts with you looking in the mirror every day sometimes and saying, I'm worthy of love. I'm worthy of the things that I deserve in this life. And I can do this. I can take care of this situation with family members or with an individual that you have to take care of who's on the spectrum. I'm not quite sure if that answers your question, but I think that at the heart of it is being able to look at yourself and discipline yourself in some ways. That's tough love sometimes. And I don't think we want to hear that, but tough love is saying, I'm not going to listen to those voices. I'm not going to listen to those emotions. I'm going to reprogram my mind, whether it's through meditation or through prayer, having some kind of a spiritual lifestyle. I'm a very spiritual person, and my foundation, I talk a little bit about this in the book. One of the things that was handed on to me was just a faith base of some sort, and having a system of belief that really helped me navigate my own grief and help me navigate the monumentous task that was suddenly put upon me overnight. And so I think having that foundation is really important. If you don't have it, leaning on other people that do have it. It's very important to, sometimes you got to get yourself out of negativity by leaning on other people. And that helped me a lot too, because I can get into my mind a lot and just keep thinking about things over and over again, sometimes in a negative way. But growing up, not having the tools or the background or the environment that you were expecting to have, or you believe that you should have had, that shouldn't be the reason why you can't look at yourself and love yourself. And the reason why I say that is because I think that if you choose to change your behaviors, to change your patterns of belief, and even if you can't do it, you can always lean on other people who can help you to get through the seasons of difficulty. It's possible. It's definitely possible. I've seen it before. It's not easy, and we don't like talking about it, but it's something that you can definitely do. It just takes a little bit of reworking of a perspective and a mindset. That's not always easy to do, but definitely if you have the right community and you're able to lean on the people that can help you and support you, you can make it happen. I think that you limit yourself by limiting yourself to what happened to you in the past. When you do that, it keeps you stuck, and you can't afford to be stuck for the people that you're taking care of, and also for yourself. You deserve to be unstuck. You deserve to have a good life too. And when you have a good life and a good perspective of who you are, then you're able to help the people that you're intending to help.
I think that's really beautiful, even though we have these moments where we're not very friendly to ourselves. We forgot something, we didn't do something, we didn't ask those questions that we meant to ask. And we have these moments where, our thoughts spiral. We could have done better. How did I not see that? I think it's really a stop in the moment to acknowledge that sometimes we have to kick ourselves in our own bottoms to say, come on, be
Yeah.
fair on yourself. Like, look what you have actually achieved.
Yeah.
And that is really hard to do, to stand and be frank with yourself in those moments.
Yeah.
And I want to land this in continuing for it to be gentle and doable. Whilst that's firm and tough love, I think
Yeah.
that's really important to also acknowledge that it's important to do our own breath work, our own mental mind maps, do all of those that work so that we don't reach burnout, so that we
Yeah.
don't get to a point where advocacy is so draining that it's hard to get up because we're so exhausted. Something that I love to do on our podcast is ask, what are 3 small, realistic supports that help you keep going, especially in moments where you felt like you had nothing left?
I always look for things that that put me in a place of happiness. One of those things is drawing or painting. It's something that I have an easel up in one of my rooms, and I just go in there and just draw. Whatever I feel like comes out. It's beautiful in the moment and it feels great. And so the other thing, I know it's very simple, but sometimes singing in the shower, just singing, just letting myself, allowing that release. And sometimes going on a walk and praying, talking to myself, and just kind of going through my thoughts. And that really helps me connect better with myself and understand how I'm feeling. I think that we fail to forget to connect with ourselves. Meditation helps, yes, but when you talk to yourself and you reflect on what you're feeling, you have a better grasp of it. And then when you have a better grasp of it, you can navigate it better. And that helped me sort of center myself in times where I felt like I was incredibly overwhelmed and my mind was going a million miles a minute.
So, art, which
Mhm.
is fun, creative outlet, singing, which is self expression, which is letting your hair down, even if no one else is listening. Doesn't
Yep.
matter if you're on key or not. And then movement, nature, getting connected and allowing yourself a moment to breathe. And that could be as simple as just stepping out your back doors and looking at your
Yeah.
plants if you've got a balcony or on your window. If you don't have that opportunity to fully go for a walk, it's adapting it to make it doable. What's one micro boundary you had to learn? Something that protected your well-being without making you feel like you were abandoning your brother?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think something very small would be, we used to talk every weekend. We used to do FaceTime every weekend. I would talk to him, and we call it Junk Food Fridays. So I would buy him junk food on Fridays. I would do this food app that is very far away, but it's fine. It works globally. There are some times where I just was too exhausted to FaceTime him on a weekend, and I had to let myself be okay with that. And I was like, I just don't have it in me to have a conversation with him. And usually I talk to him about 15, 20 minutes, sometimes longer, just depends. And I really wanted to set up these phone dates. These phone dates where we would FaceTime, we would talk, and just sometimes I just didn't have the bandwidth because I'm so busy. And I felt guilty about it, but it was a little boundary that helped me where I just kind of said, not this weekend. Maybe I'll call him on Wednesday. Maybe I'll call him later down the line. And I had to not get hard on myself for that. And so even if I meant to, because he likes a rhythm, he likes a schedule, and I couldn't meet that schedule, and I had to be okay with failing from the standard that I created where we would talk every weekend to being okay with maybe not being able to talk to him that weekend and moving into another day. That kind of helped me just breathe and just not be hard on myself because I decided to take care of myself that weekend and it was just better for me overall. I had something that came up or I didn't feel selfish. I didn't put any guilt on myself for taking care of myself and trying to communicate to myself that that was selfish because it wasn't. It was taking care of me and establishing a boundary that was healthy for me.
I really love that. Whilst you created this routine, you could recognize that if you showed up in that moment, you weren't showing up with your best self and that that was okay. And that you probably felt guilty when the very first time, maybe the second time. But as you realized that your brother was able to adapt in that moment and have some understanding backwards and forwards of grace and kindness,
Yeah.
that guilt, eventually you're able to work through it so that
Yeah.
it's something that you see as self-care or self-love so you can show up better the next time. And if you could leave our listeners with one sentence, something you wish someone had said to you, what would it be?
In that moment, you're doing a great job. You are doing amazing.
I think that's really important that people are able to recognize that they are doing a good job, that they're not failing, and that they are being amazing, and that
Yeah.
it is a very difficult space. We need to celebrate those people and the journey that they're on. And as we're coming to a close today, where can listeners find you and your book and connect with you and your work?
So my book is on agazitbooks.com. So it's on the website and there's a variety of ways you can purchase. You can purchase on Barnes & Nobles, on Lulu, on Amazon. I also have an Instagram at author Agazit Negash, which also links you to my Facebook page and links you to the website as well.
Fantastic. Agazit, thank you for coming onto Radiant Moments and sharing your story with such honesty and heart. Today, we've talked about what it means to become a caregiver and a guardian overnight. Grieving while still having to advocate and function day to day, caring for an autistic loved one with dignity and emotional presence without romanticizing the reality, and how resilience can be something we inherit and something we build through quiet acts of love. If you're listening and you've never planned this role, I want you to hear this. Your grief matters, your needs matter, and you're not required to be heroic to be worthy of support. To everyone listening, thank you for spending this time with us. You don't have to hold it all alone. I'm Michelle, and this is Radiant Moments. And until next time, take gentle care of your radiant moments and of yourself.
Bye.
Bye.